What's up, guys? Welcome to Roensch Capital Charts. In this video, we're going to do a deep dive on Netflix stock ticker NFLX, trying to pull out as much bias as we possibly can, using things like the volume profile, the options chain bias. At the end of the video, we'll take a look at expected move, and I'll also take you through the psychological levels that I think we're going to see elevated trading around, and the things that I think I'm going to be watching very closely throughout the entire month of April 2024 to really ensure I have a good grasp on this name throughout the entire month. Now, let's start by taking a look at the psychological levels here on the 4-hour chart. This is an extremely heavily watched chart, lots of eyeballs, and you'll notice my chart is very simple. I have the gray line, that's the 200 period moving average, and the white line, that's the 50 period moving average. I only want what has eyeballs, because that means decisions will be made around those levels. Now let's take a look here. Now we know that it says high 634.36, but the all-time high on Netflix is 799 cents. So that 634 throughout the month of April, you know, if that's still in play by the time you're watching this, by the way, I think the later in the month that you're actually watching this in April, I think you're probably in a position to have more of an advantage where you're able to utilize all this information and then use your hindsight to make probably better decisions. But in any case, that 634.36, that's not going to have, of course, the same psychological barrier potential as the all-time high would. It's just the chart doesn't go back far enough. But we'll see that once we get to the weekly, don't worry. So that 634.36 level, I'm not, it's just a recent high. I'm not paying too much attention to that. What I'm really watching here on the 4-hour from a bullish perspective. Listen, we've seen this 50 period holding as an ascending support going back to mid to late February. Listen, bulls, a huge power move throughout the entirety of April would be to maintain this exact look, an ascending level with that 50 period, staying close to the stock, close enough where that any back test to test that 50 period is not giving too much in terms of stock price, but keeps the stock on an ascending trend. That would be a power move out of the bulls to maintain that throughout the entirety of April. Now, bears. Here on the 4-hour chart, there is kind of two things on your mind. All right? Break this ascending trend. You bears, you want to see a crack downside back below the 50 period on as much volume as possible, right? And then ideally, a retest of the level on below average volume. This would likely take place over a couple of days at least. And then a hard rejection on above average volume heading down toward that $600 level, potentially even that 200 period moving average here on the 4-hour. Okay, which brings us to the most heavily watched chart on this stock, which is going to be the daily. Now you can see here that 50-day moving average as of right now sits right around 575. Bulls. A couple things on my mind in the month of April. First of all, 650 is a smaller psychological level, but a psychological level nonetheless. Okay, an upside crack and hold of 650, a multi-day hold, that opens up for me to look to, at that point, it's time to start talking about $700 a share. All right, but that all starts with holding $600 a share, which is the primary, or was more so, the primary psychological level in March. With a stock that's priced like Netflix is, each $100 is a major psychological level. Okay, bulls, in addition to that white line, the 50-day moving average throughout April. Listen, I would love to see that 50-day get above 600. That adds an additional psychological barrier protection, right? To backslides back to testing 6. Because if you want to really understand your own position as a bull, you have to understand the bears. Bears, what are you guys looking for? You want this to be back in the 5s as soon as possible, right? And you actually wouldn't mind, bears, if this 50-day moved upside, if you could crack 600 and the 50-day in one swift motion to the downside, getting below both in a couple of days on big volume. Bulls, if that's what the bears are looking for, then you have to look for as much protection against that kind of scenario as possible, which means getting that 50-day up above 600 and holding it in an ascending pattern with any test being a clean hold on high volume. Now, take a look here. Implied volatility, very, very important, especially if you're trading options. In comparison to the last, actually, you know what? Let's zoom in a little bit. And let's look at the last 4 months or so. It's in the higher end of that range. Okay, understand, guys. Compared to your intended trade time frame, the higher implied volatility goes, the higher the potential risk of IV crush. Right? Pay very close attention to that. Factor that into your risk profile analysis on your positions. Now, let's do a quick volume profile analysis on the weekly. By the way, listen, if you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, please do so. I greatly appreciate it. My goal here is to hit 10,000 by the end of April, and I think we can pull that off with your help. So appreciate you jumping aboard. Now, the volume profile here on the weekly chart. You can see here that, listen, if we zoom in a little bit, you'll notice that the volume for most of 2024, especially the last couple of months, like since February hit, we've been fading in terms of volume. Volume's a little bit low, and the stock itself has been slowly grinding higher. Listen, bulls, if Netflix is able to continue an uptrend, I want to see volume increase. I want a bigger sample size agreeing with that uptrend, as big of a sample size as possible. When a stock is moving in your direction, in your favor, I've found it's always best to have it doing so on as much volume as possible just to get that bigger sample size. There's more bias. There's another layer when you peel back the onion of bias in your favor. Okay? Speaking of bias, let's take a look at the options bias that we've seen on Netflix here since the start of 2024. This is the put-call ratio. 1.0 is even in terms of put and call open interest. Okay? Now, the lower that line goes, the heavier the call ratio gets. Okay? Or in this case, since we are above 1.0, the less heavy the put ratio gets, the put bias. Now, Netflix, the put call ratio has actually pulled back since early to mid-March, but we're still sitting at 1.27, which means there is a put side bias in terms of open interest here currently on Netflix. Now, last thing to take a look at here. Let's take a look at the expected move by the end of April. The last expiration date in April that we have is April 26th. And the expected move by close on April 26th, if we go over here, is plus or minus $69.74. And if we head back, let's look at this on the daily chart. That puts us at close on April 26th. The options traders are telling us, this is literally priced, this is a technical term, expected move, right? It's priced based on the implied volatility at each particular expiration. So it's quite literally what the sample size of options traders is telling us in terms of what they believe volatility will be by that expiration. So what they're telling us is by the end or toward the end of April, Netflix will either be as high as close to $700 a share or as low as, just below about $560. Okay, so the traders are expecting quite the move here in the next month. Now understand that expected move by design does not have a directional bias. It's a volatility expectation. All the analysis that we just did, including the put-call ratio, all that, the volume profile, all of that helps us develop, okay, what is the potential directional bias? And then coupled with the volatility expectation, especially if we're looking to trade options, that gives us a really good base to decide what we want to trade and how we want to trade that, right? Does your expectation exceed what the market's expectation is in terms of volatility, right? Do you have a strong directional bias along with that? Maybe you're someone who wants to look to buy contracts. On the flip side, if your volatility expectation is much lower than the market's, okay, and you think Netflix is going sideways, maybe you're someone who wants to look to utilize potentially some iron condors or something like that. Listen, if you got value out of the video, please subscribe to the channel. I greatly appreciate it. And by the way, listen, if your goal here is to try to expedite this process, I learned how to trade for completely free, though it took me longer than it should have. At least I think so. And my market tuition, so to speak, was probably quite a bit higher than it needed to be. So listen, if you want to learn to trade for free, I highly encourage you to do so. That's the route that I went. But if your goal is to try to expedite things, I highly encourage you to check out the Roensch Capital Gold server. That link in the pinned comment, that'll allow you to get grandfathered in at the current rate. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one.